Old maps and bird's-eye views of Hartford, Connecticut reveal one of the city's most intriguing lost landmarks, its very first civic water supply, a reservoir which existed for 65 years, 1855 to 1920. It stood along the west side of Garden Street, just west of downtown in the Asylum Hill neighborhood. Hi. This is History with me, Dan Sterner. Remember to subscribe to the channel as we explore the story of Hartford's lost Garden Street Reservoir. Before the reservoir was built, residents of Hartford relied on private wells as their source of water. At the start of the 19th century, the Gleason and Cowles Aqueduct Company received a charter to bring in fresh water through a series of logs. But difficulties with property owners led to the failure of the enterprise. By the middle of the century, though, plans were afoot to pump water into the city directly from the Connecticut River. As shown in this section from the 1877 bird's eye view of Hartford, the commissioners erected a pumping station along the river at the foot of Pleasant Street at 2 Water Street. It was near the southern end of what's now Riverside Park. Built in 1855 and demolished in 1922, the station resembled a grand Italianate villa. The project had gotten off to a rough start, with much political strife and red tape. The original engineer was fired, and his order for an English-Cornish engine was canceled. Instead, the city commissioned a pump from the Woodruff and Beach Iron Works. This had the advantage of being both less expensive and locally made right in the city of Hartford. There was much jubilation in the city when the engine went into operation in October 1855, as a reporter declared in the Hartford Courant newspaper on October 24th, quote, "For today it will do to say that Yankee genius has accomplished what English engineers had given up as an impossibility, to wit, an improvement on the time-honored Cornish engine for water-pumping purposes. Hydraulic engineers will be interested to examine our Hartford works. If everything works as is now confidently expected, they can learn something in this staid old place. Hurrah for the Yankees," unquote. The water was pumped across the city and up a hill to an 8.5 million gallon man-made reservoir that was about 125 feet above the level of the Connecticut River. Early on, it was called the Lord's Hill Reservoir or the Asylum Hill Reservoir. That's because it was built on Lord's Hill, which became known as Asylum Hill after the American Asylum for the Deaf and Dumb was constructed there. As shown in this section of the 1869 Atlas of Hartford and Tolland counties, the asylum, now known as the American School for the Deaf and located in West Hartford, was directly adjacent to the south of the new reservoir. The earth and stone walls of the reservoir raised it up above the surrounding landscape. The reservoir became a popular recreation spot. To access it from Garden Street, you would have climbed a set of stairs adjacent to the old gatehouse, which also served as a residence for the reservoir's superintendent. Once atop the walls, there was a path along the square perimeter around the water. The citizens of Hartford enjoyed walking and sometimes running races along this path. In this photograph, the top of the gatehouse is visible on the left. On the right, in the distance, are the towers of the Connecticut State Capitol Building and the lost Hartford Public High School building on Hopkins Street. In the center, directly southeast of the reservoir, was a building erected in 1900 by the School for the Deaf. Called Cogswell Hall, it was named in honor of Mason F. Cogswell, one of the school's founders, whose daughter Alice was in its very first class of 3 students in 1817. The red brick and Indiana limestone structure faced towards Garden Street and was designed by Hartford architect William C. Brocklesby. It initially served as classrooms and offices and was later used as a girls' dormitory. When this later photo of the reservoir was taken, the water level was much lower than in the previous photo. This one also shows another building in the distance that was erected in 1906, the Universalist Church of the Redeemer on Asylum Street. While strolling the path and sailing toy boats in the water were popular summertime activities, the reservoir really came into its own in the winter. When the water froze, it was a great place for skating and hockey, but there could be danger. On Christmas Day, 1907, Arthur Knott, a clerk at Brown Thompson Department Store, was playing hockey with 3 friends when he fell through a crack in the ice. As the Current reported, quote, "He was able to catch himself before his head went under, and by spreading his arms he kept above the surface, although the water was decidedly chilly. The lee was too thin for his companions to venture near, and so with Edward Phelps in the lead, they formed a line with their hockey sticks and managed to get Knott on the thick lee before his strength gave out. Last night, Mr. Knott was getting over the shock and had developed no serious effects from his experience," unquote. Sadly, other incidents did not have a happy ending. In November 1897, Officer William W. Harris, who made daily rounds around the reservoir, discovered the body of Miss Alice Patton, who had been floating in the water for at least 2 days. Described as a well-dressed, middle-aged woman of independent means, she resided in the Hotel Capitol on Main Street. She had been acting strangely for a few weeks, and some days earlier had filled her room with gas. When hotel employees noticed the smell, they attempted to gain access to her room through a transom window, but then she suddenly opened her door and informed them that she had turned off the gas. The hotel manager was concerned when she went out a few days later and did not return. Patton's was not the only incident of suicide at the reservoir. In March 1910, Mrs. Mary Cosgrove, who lived at Broad and Russ Streets and had been suffering from what was described as a nervous trouble and melancholia for the previous 5 months, slipped away from the watchful eyes of her daughter and drowned herself after leaving her coat and hat with her name pinned to it on the reservoir's wall. In July 1912, the Garden Street Reservoir was emptied for cleaning for the first time in many years. The reporter covering the story for the Hartford Courant at the time explained that the bodies of all known suicide victims had been found, but expressed curiosity at whether the receding waters might reveal, quote, "the bones of any other departed citizens," unquote. As it turned out, no remains were found. The reporter's other interest was in the 30-foot deep reservoir's many fish. On July 12th, fishing was officially permitted, quote, "because every fish caught means just so many less to dig up out of the mud on the bottom when the place is cleaned out," unquote. As the Current reported the following day, quote, "The fishing in the Garden Street Reservoir, which has been open to the public for the last few days, has proved a disappointment to those who have tried it. Many men and boys have been fishing there, but nothing doing is the common report. Last evening, 30 fishermen were lined up on the shore, and over 100 spectators watched them. Each fisherman had at least one line or pole, and some had several. One 4-inch roach was the largest fish caught, and its arrival on shore was greeted with cheers. One man is reported to have caught 5 large perch about daybreak yesterday, and another perch, and a foot long, was reported to have been caught during the forenoon, but small roach are all most of the fishermen got," unquote. If you are enjoying this video, please remember to subscribe to the channel. The water was released very slowly to prevent damage to the reservoir's earth and stone banks. Finally, over 2 months later, on September 17th, the Current reported that, quote, "after the water got down to a depth of 3 feet or so, the inlet pipe in the middle and the outlet opening near the south end became visible, and now, of course, they are fully exposed. The screen has rusted all the way from the entrance to the outlet and let all the fishes go down the pipe, with the result that towards one end the pipe was chock full all the way through the bank to the gatehouse valve on Garden Street, and the water wouldn't run off anymore. The last heavy rain, in fact, raised the water in the reservoir. So things remained for a few days, and anyone who scrambled down the steep sides of the basin could see a few fish swimming around and around at the entrance to the pipe, with an occasional big eel squirming about in the mud. There was one particularly big eel, but he eluded all hunters at the end and hid in a pipe somewhere. The water was finally drawn off by taking out the valve in the gatehouse, and then there was a rush of water which emptied the basin in a few minutes and landed fishes, eels, and all in the lower part of the gatehouse. The number was not, however, as great as expected, mostly perch and sunfish, and less than half a dozen of the former were as much as a pound in weight. Some of the fish were scooped out from the gatehouse, some landed in a sort of pocket under the Garden Street sidewalk, and others got away into the sewer. When or if they reached Park River, they must have been surprised at the difference in the flavor of the water." Unquote. Besides fish, for a few weeks back in May 1885, the reservoir had another resident who no doubt enjoyed the ready source of food. One day, Edward C. Frisbee, who lived nearby at 136 Collins Street, discovered a seal in the orchard behind his house. He wrapped it in a blanket and promptly dumped it into the reservoir. In the coming days, the seal attracted a lot of public attention, including being pelted with stones by neighborhood boys. On May 15, 1885, the Current reported, quote, "A wooden float has been anchored in the Garden Street Reservoir for the comfort and convenience of the seal." Unquote. Some worried, though, that the seal was not very comfortable and wondered how long he would survive, restricted to a limited pool of fresh water where he'd soon eaten all of the fish. The seal wandered away a number of times, but was rounded up by the locals and returned to the reservoir. On one occasion, the seal crossed Collins Street and entered a pasture where he bit several cows. Finally, one day, the seal disappeared and was not seen again. Decades later, when people heard old-timers say that a seal once lived in the reservoir, they assumed it was an urban legend. Starting in the late 1860s, a new system of city reservoirs began to rise in the Trout Brook watershed in West Hartford. By the start of the 20th century, the Garden Street Reservoir, which only held enough water to supply the city for 1/3 of one day, had long since been superseded by a much more extensive system. The city continued to maintain the Asylum Hill facility, however, because it had originally acquired the land from the School for the Deaf on condition that if it abandoned its use for a reservoir, the property would revert to the school. The Current reported in 1919, quote, "The Garden Street Reservoir, once a real reservoir, has not only long been an eyesore, but it has been an expensive luxury to the city, making no return on the investment tied up in it, and calling for outlays from time to keep it in anything like condition, to say nothing of the cost of a caretaker." One of the annual Water Board reports of recent years has this to say under the caption of Pumping Station and Garden Street Reservoir. "These properties have been maintained during the year and kept in good condition. They have been of no actual service to the department and probably will not be for the present. The Garden Street Reservoir is too low for ordinary use in connection with the system. And with the installation of a new supply main, it will have little or no value to the department from a water supply standpoint." Unquote. Some readers objected to the description of the reservoir as an eyesore, citing instead its value for recreation and urging that it be turned into a public park. The very same year as the above-quoted article, 1919, the Hartford Fire Insurance Company purchased the grounds of the American School for the Deaf and soon erected its new home office building there on Asylum Hill. As the new owners, the company also waived any restrictions on the reservoir property, should the city choose to officially discontinue its use. After much contentious debate, the city eventually decided to abandon the reservoir and accept an offer to sell it to the insurance company for $22,000. The following year, the company began the work of leveling off the reservoir, and in March 1921, steam shovels were busy digging away the remaining embankments. By the time of this 1920s photo, the reservoir was gone. The School for the Deaf's former Cogswell Hall was used for a time by the Hartford until it was torn down in 1935 and replaced by the Caledonian Insurance Company Building. By then, an extension of Broad Street, named Cogswell Street, was laid out to connect Asylum Avenue and Garden Street between the Caledonian and Hartford Fire Insurance buildings. The Universalist Church of the Redeemer, which I mentioned earlier in this video, was demolished at that time to make way for this new street, and the congregation relocated to West Hartford. Cogswell Street passes through what had been a corner of the old reservoir and passes by the parking lot where the bulk of that lost landmark once stood. Franklin J. Abbey grew up in the neighborhood. He graduated from Hartford Public High School in 1889 and then attended Yale. He was living in Brockton, Massachusetts when he heard of the impending demolition of the Garden Street Reservoir. In a letter to the Current printed on November 28, 1919, he wrote, quote, "I have read with genuine sorrow of the proposal to eliminate the Garden Street Reservoir. I cannot say that this sorrow is based upon other than sentimental reasons, for presumably the old reservoir has outlived its usefulness as a source of water supply. But to us who were boys in the 80s and lived in that neighborhood, the old landmark awakes many glad memories. There we sailed our boats, and there we ran races around the gravel walk that has encircled the basin for many years. I never revisit Hartford without climbing the old stone steps and making that circuit with its beautiful view of the mountains toward the west. Down its steep sides we rolled and tumbled in summer and sometimes ventured to coast down on our sleds in winter. I well remember Jim Terry's fast-sailing catamaran, which outdistanced all the other boats in an ever-memorable race in which perhaps a dozen boats were entered. Many of the old boys will recall the exciting hockey games on the reservoir, and, strange to say, there were few accidents. It was a wonder that nobody was drowned, at least I cannot recall a fatality of this sort, during all the years we played on the reservoir. It does me a world of good to go back to these old days, and I trust the same will be true of any of my old boyhood companions and friends who may happen to read this." Unquote. Abbey eventually did return to Hartford in 1929 to work for the Harold G. Holcomb Insurance Agency. He passed away in 1937. I hope you enjoyed this video about the old Garden Street Reservoir. In the description below, I'll put a link to a Substack article where I'll be sharing a bit more about the origins of the Garden Street Reservoir. Remember to subscribe and check out my other videos, and as always, thanks for watching.